Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about a pretty scary possibility, something that, I feel like most people have definitely thought about before. It's been something that, of course, over the years has been mentioned countless times, right? Like, even during my lifetime, right, we've had the threat of, oh, North Korea is going to nuke somebody, Russia is going to nuke somebody. Like, it's always been something that people have been kind of concerned about, but apparently now it's more of a possibility than ever, and it's just something I kind of wanted to talk about, man. So this is all coming primarily from President Joe Biden himself. He made some pretty recent remarks that have scared a lot of people, that have made a lot of people think about the possibility of nuclear warfare again. A lot of this is really centered around the entire conflict going on in Ukraine. That's still one of the big situations that's kind of leading to this. That's, the mentions of nuclear weapons being used in Ukraine by Putin and the Russians has essentially put the world on edge to the point where, everything's being considered now. I mean, it's a possibility, it's a legitimate threat, and people are low-key worried about it, and rightfully so, man. I mean, the idea of nuclear warfare, especially between, like, the United States and Russia, I mean, you gotta think that would literally devastate humanity. That would destroy the world as we know it, and as tough as it is to think about something like that happening, I mean, it's not impossible. And I don't want to make this video and scare people and make you think that this is an inevitability, my bad for stuttering there, but because it's not an inevitability. It's not like this is 100% guaranteed, but of course, with everything going on in the world right now the way that it is, like, everybody's just worried about what the next step's gonna be. Apparently, even the people who are supposed to be the ones protecting us, right? So, President Joe Biden said Thursday that the risk of nuclear, quote, Armageddon is at the highest level since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, as Russian officials speak of the possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons after suffering massive setbacks in the 8-month invasion of Ukraine. Speaking at a fundraiser for the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, Biden said that Russian President Vladimir Putin was, quote, a guy I know fairly well, and the Russian leader was, quote, not joking when he talks about the use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons. Biden added, quote, we have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. He suggested the threat from Putin is real because his military, as you might say, is significantly underperforming. U.S. officials for months have warned of the prospect that Russia could use weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine as it has faced a series of strategic setbacks on the battlefield, though Biden's remarks marked the starkest warnings yet issued by the U.S. government about the nuclear stakes. It was not immediately clear whether Biden was referring to any new assessment of Russian intentions. As recently as this week, though, U.S. officials have said they've seen no change to Russia's nuclear forces that would require any sort of change in the alert posture of U.S. nuclear forces. Okay, so let's talk about this, right? So right now, obviously, the war in Ukraine is still unfolding. It's going into months now that it's basically been going on, and while a lot of people have kind of, I guess, gotten used to everything going on in the news like this, you gotta think historically it's still a very fresh situation, and it's not really been going well for Russia. If you've been paying attention to the news, or like you watch Optimus news or anything like that, you'll know that Russia has been basically suffering from a bunch of different things. Not only do they have a low overall war morale in their soldiers, their military communication has been less than stellar, to say the least. They've been getting their ass whipped by Russia or Ukraine in a lot of these areas, and territory that Russia captured from the Ukrainians is quickly getting returned back to Ukrainian hands because, well, every time the Russians set a new defense line, well, they just get beat back and have to retreat 20 kilometers back again and set up a new defense line. And every time they do that, they leave behind a whole bunch of equipment. They're leaving behind tanks and weaponry and everything. In fact, it's gotten so bad, the Russians leaving stuff behind has gotten so bad that over half of Ukraine's tanks that are actively being used in the war actually have been repurposed from Russian tanks that have just been left behind or captured. So Ukraine is doing pretty well in terms of this war. I mean, they obviously were the underdog. They were considered, to be an easy opponent for Russia at the beginning of all of this. And it just hasn't been going the way that Russia has wanted it to go. They've been suffering from high casualty rates. Like I said, they're losing the territory that they've captured from the Ukrainians. Their economy has definitely been hurt by this entire thing. They've pretty much become isolated socially with the international community. It really just isn't going Russia's way right now. And it's gotten to the point that Russia Russia is essentially exhausting all of its options. I mean, they tried to, you know, basically enact a draft in their country. Hundreds of thousands of Russians ended up fleeing the country, and there's been footage showing, like, the soldiers that are being basically drafted or conscripted into the military, getting in drunken fights and disrespecting their commanders. I saw a video yesterday of like 500 Russian troops getting off a train and staging essentially a protest because they didn't have anything other than weapons. They weren't given money or food or enough supplies. It's not going well for Russia altogether, right? Like, they've just basically very poorly mismanaged this entire war so far. And like I said, a lot of their options are out the door, you know? Like, their first option, they were going to try and storm Kiev in like a couple days, and that was how they were going to take over Ukraine. That didn't work, so then they refocused to like the southeast of the country and to the southern end. That didn't really work out for them. Ukraine's capturing that territory back, and they've been winning consistently on the front lines. Making threats to Europe to cut off gas supplies and things like that haven't worked, even though Europe is still facing a potential energy crisis from the entire thing. They've shown pretty much no willingness to cooperate with Russia, and they're basically just going to try and tough it out on their own. Russia's getting to a point where they're becoming desperate, and they need something there that can help kind of like right the ship in a way, you know what I mean? And right now, that option is nuclear weapons, and that's the way out of this that they see. You know, they've been threatening to use nuclear weapons in an effort to try and scare the West out of supporting Ukraine. No surprise, that didn't work. Threatening to nuke people doesn't necessarily make them want to work with you or listen to you anymore. And it's getting to the point where there's like some legitimate concern, right? Like, will Russia actually use nuclear weapons? Well, a few months ago, man, I would have said it was a bluff. I would have said they're not going to do it, but considering the direction the war is heading in, considering how everything's playing out right now, I don't know if I would really put it behind Putin to actually try and use a nuclear bomb or something against Ukraine in order to try and like help them win the war. It really wouldn't surprise me. Like, Vladimir Putin, you have to think, right? This guy has shown he doesn't really give too many fucks what the international community thinks. And that isn't a good thing. It doesn't make him cool, but like, at the end of the day, he just doesn't give a shit, right? Like, he's willing to do whatever it takes for Russia to come out on top in this conflict. And he's made it clear multiple times through statements that even if that means using nuclear weapons, he's willing to do that. Now, what we should really worry about is what the international reaction to Russia potentially using nukes would actually be. Like, if, let's say, God forbid, right, that Russia were to use a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine, what happens then? Does the United States and its allies nuke Russia? What do they do? Do they join the war militarily and fight on behalf of Ukraine? What exactly happens? What is the next step forward? I don't think economic sanctions are going to be enough to deter Russia. They've already tried pretty much every economic sanction they can think of. It did significantly impact the Russian economy, but it didn't completely decimate the Russian economy. Obviously, just giving Russia stern warnings like, hey, don't do that. Don't you dare use those nuclear bombs. Like, clearly that's not really going to work either. So it's gotten to this point where it's like, what is the response? Right? Like, how do we respond to Russia using nuclear weapons? I have no idea, but the scary reality of it is at least one of the options is to use nuclear weapons back against Russia, and that almost guaranteed would create a crisis where, I mean, it's going to lead to nuclear warfare, right? I don't really see any way out of it at that point, and it's just a scary thought, man. Like, this is really the direction the world is heading in. It's just a terrifying reality that we really live in here, so... Anyway, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel, follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubToOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, talking about nuclear Armageddon and signing out.